was a British commander in the right place at the right time.
Dowding didn't really lead his men into battle. He played a role much more like the chairman of the board and left operational control to his group commanders.
He had a very clear view of his role, which was simply to provide the air defence of Britain at all costs.
Dowding created what was by far the most formidable air defence system in the world. And the great thing was that most people didn't realise that he'd done that, at least for Goering.
During the 1930s, Dowding quietly went about building an air defence system around southern England. Whilst most people were transfixed by the development of the new generation of fighters, it was Dowding's genius to realise that the most important task was to find the best way in which to use them.
What emerges, in fact, is that in our finest hour, the British behaved in the way in which they usually imagine the Germans to behave, and the Germans were actually rather British. The Germans were led by a romantic amateur. They failed to recognise the potential of the latest technology or exploit it. They had a very odd, old-fashioned warrior hero ethos, whereas the British were led by seasoned, ruthless professionals. They believed in teamwork, they played down the role of individuals, they had a very detailed plan that they stuck to, they were Teutonic and thorough. And so, of course, they won.
Dave's trip to the south coast continues.
9 to the 10. Beautiful. Over the wing of the Spitfire.
In 1940, the British knew they were about to suffer an air assault of unprecedented ferocity. The fighting over the Channel had merely been an overture. The only question was when the hammer blow would fall. But ever since he took control of Fighter Command, Hugh Dowding had been building up the world's most effective air defence system. Its greatest innovation was that for the first time ever, air warfare could be controlled from the ground. What made this possible was his secret weapon. Dowding had put his faith in a highly experimental system. At his insistence, a chain of 53 radar stations was built along the coast of Britain, covering hundreds of miles. It was huge, but utterly untested. What had he built? A war-winning weapon, or just a white elephant?
We, as pilots, knew practically nothing about this. We knew that these towers were being built, and we were told they were something electronic. But we didn't really know what effect they were having on our activities until the battle started in 1940.
There couldn't have been a better commander-in-chief to fight the Battle of Britain, in my opinion, than Dowding. He understood the role of radar. There might have been other commanders-in-chief who might have been dismissive of it. Dowding was 100% for it, and he recognised that here was the weapon with which he could defeat the Luftwaffe. Without radar, he would have been so outnumbered that he would have had no chance whatsoever.
The radar was very important to the RAF because they didn't need to fly standard patrols. They could conserve fuel, aircraft time, and flying time. Because at any given time they knew exactly where the attacking forces were, which strengths, which direction they were flying. So at the last moment, they could send up the interceptors.
The Germans knew all about radar, but for them, it was a naval technology to be used mainly at sea. They were bemused that the British should think it had any role against aircraft.
Once during bad weather conditions, we were flying in the clouds, and suddenly a Spitfire formation came right up behind us, and we wondered how this was possible, having no visibility whatsoever. That was the first time we heard about radar.
RAF fighters had VHF radios in the cockpit. That meant pilots would remain in constant contact with the controllers, who would update them on enemy movements, allowing them to get into the best attacking position. Most German fighters had to wait months to be given radios, and even then didn't like using them. Radar stations gave advanced warning, but only out to sea. Once over the coast, planes were invisible to it. But Dowding had a fail-safe backup. 30,000 men armed with binoculars, altitude calculators and telephones made up the observer corps. Information flowed down their thousands of phone lines into the filter stations, and from there to Dowding's HQ at Bentley Priory. Numbers, altitudes, aircraft types, bearings, everything Dowding needed to form a complete picture of the day's engagements.
Having put all this together, you then needed a means of actually connecting the fighters with the enemy bombers. And this is where Dowding's foresight really comes in. He created a network which is probably best described as the world's first intranet. It's in fact an analog intranet system, a command and control system which is a network in which each bit of it can connect with every other bit of it, and information is passed all the way through it, up, down, filtered and out to whoever needs to take which decision at which particular time.
Dowding had split the country into 4 groups. Each had a central control room, responsible for its fighter airfields, and for deciding which squadrons to scramble. Till early August, the Germans had mostly attacked Channel shipping, but that was about to change. The RAF braced itself against the tidal wave coming its way. The opening salvo of Goering's attack on Britain was scheduled for August the 13th, given a suitably Wagnerian codename, Adlertag, or Eagle Day. He reckoned the RAF wouldn't survive a week. Now would come the biggest test for all Dowding's meticulously laid plans, his technological daring and his strategic doggedness. Bearing the brunt of the attack would be the squadrons based in the southeast, belonging to 11 Group, coordinated from its base at Uxbridge.
This operations room bore the brunt of the enemy air offensive in 1940, mainly by its proximity to the continent. You bear in mind the German Air Force was barely 20 miles away across the Channel, and ME-109 could be across within 4 minutes, so not much time to get squadrons airborne to intercept enemy aircraft. What took place in this building technically decided the fate of this country in 1940. That is why it was visited by Winston Churchill on several occasions. And indeed, the words "never in the field of human conflict were so much owed by so many to so few" was actually said by Churchill on leaving this building on the 16th of August 1940. He realised that this building held the fate of the country in its hands.
The man in the hot seat was 11 Group Commander Keith Park. He was a very different character from Dowding, but shared his strategic vision.
If there is a forgotten hero at the Battle of Britain, then that man has to be Keith Park, a New Zealander who spent almost all of his career on fighters.
Keith Park was right out of the top drawer.
He used to visit us quite often. He came in very informally in his Hurricane and find out how we were getting on.
He was an approachable man and a fighting man's man.
He led from the front, did Keith Park, and he was a very fine air officer commanding.
Park was a remarkable commander. He had a very clear view of the battlefield. He displayed, I think, throughout the battle a remarkable flexibility in his response to what the Germans were doing.